In the foggy shadows of the shipyard, silence is usually a warning. But for the kidnappers holding a teenage boy hostage, silence means it is already too late. A retired operative is hunting them, but the true weapon isn't in his holster. It is the silver shadow moving at his side. Watch closely as Wolf, an elite German Shepherd, dismantles an armed gang with surgical precision, proving that the most dangerous bite is the one you never hear coming. This is the story of tracking in the mist. The scent of cedar shavings and linseed oil filled the garage, a comforting aroma that Jake had come to prefer over the metallic tang of gun oil from his past life. Jake, a 45-year-old man with weathered skin and deep lines etched around his eyes from years of high-stakes decisions, knelt on the concrete floor. He held a small leather pouch. Opposite him sat Wolf, a magnificent 5-year-old German Shepherd. Wolf was not the typical black and tan. His coat was a rare silver sable, a ghostly mix of gray and white that made him look like a phantom in the dim light. The dog's amber eyes were locked onto Jake with an intensity that spoke of their years working together in the K9 unit. Wolf was calm, disciplined, and fiercely loyal, a retired professional just like his owner. "Find it," Jake whispered, hiding the pouch behind a stack of lumber. Wolf moved with fluid grace, his nose working the air. He ignored the distraction of sawdust and paint thinner, zeroing in on the specific scent of clove oil hidden within the pouch. Seconds later, Wolf sat promptly in front of the lumber stack and let out a low, controlled whine to signal his discovery. "Good boy," Jake praised, tossing Wolf a rubber toy. The dog caught it with a soft snap of his jaws, his tail wagging in a slow, rhythmic sweep. The peaceful moment was interrupted as the side door swung open. Leo, Jake's 17-year-old son, burst into the room. Leo was lanky and energetic, with messy hair and a camera constantly gripped in his hand like an extension of his arm. He wore a hoodie that was slightly too big for him, eager to capture the world through a lens rather than live in it. "Dad, you have to see this," Leo said, holding up his phone. "There is a rumor about the abandoned shipyard District 4. The lighting tonight is going to be perfect for an Urbex vlog. If I get this footage, my channel could finally monetize." Jake's expression hardened instantly. "District 4? Absolutely not, Leo. That place is a structural nightmare. Rusting cranes, collapsing floors, and no security. It is not safe." "It is exploring, Dad." "Not a war zone," Leo argued, his excitement deflating into frustration. "You treat everything like a threat assessment. I need this content." "Safety is not negotiable," Jake replied, his voice steady but final. "You are staying home." The argument ended in a heavy silence. Leo stormed out, leaving Jake alone with Wolf, who sensed the tension and nudged Jake's hand with a wet nose. Hours later, the house was dark. The fog from the harbor had rolled in, pressing against the windows. In his bedroom, Leo quietly unlatched the window. He had his camera bag slung over his shoulder, his heart pounding with the thrill of rebellion. He carefully climbed out onto the trellis. A soft sound of paws on floorboards made him freeze. Wolf was standing in the open doorway of the bedroom, his head cocked to the side. The large shepherd stepped forward, his posture alert. He opened his mouth, drawing a breath to release a warning bark that would surely wake Jake. "Shh, Wolf, no," Leo whispered desperately. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of dried beef jerky he had saved from dinner. He tossed it gently to the rug. Wolf looked at the treat, then back at Leo. The dog knew Leo was Pack, not an intruder. The conflict played out in Wolf's eyes, but his loyalty to the boy won out. He stepped forward, took the treat silently, and watched with worried eyes as Leo disappeared into the mist. Wolf did not bark, but he paced by the window, a low, anxious whine vibrating in his throat. The abandoned shipyard District 4 was a skeleton of industry, a graveyard of rusted iron and rotting wood, shrouded in the heavy night fog of Portland. Leo moved through the shadows, his breathing shallow and fast. The damp air clung to his skin, but the thrill of the location urged him forward. He held his camera steady, panning across the decaying ribs of a massive unfinished hull. This was the kind of footage that would put his channel on the map. He climbed a rusted gantry to get a higher vantage point. Below him, near the water's edge, the scene changed abruptly. The darkness was pierced by the focused beams of tactical flashlights. Leo crouched low, zooming his lens in. A sleek, modern speedboat bobbed silently against the rotting pier, looking entirely out of place amidst the decay. Through the viewfinder, Leo watched a group of men moving with military efficiency. They were not typical dock workers. Dressed in dark, nondescript tactical gear, they were loading heavy, black reinforced crates onto the boat. These were not drugs or weapons, but high-tech containers, likely filled with stolen microchips or sensitive electronics. Leo's finger hovered over the record button, capturing every second. He shifted his weight to get a better angle. A sharp metallic clang rang out through the silent shipyard as his sneaker slipped on a loose sheet of corrugated iron. The sound was deafening in the quiet night. Below, the men froze instantly, then their heads snapped upward in unison toward the gantry. "He is up there! Get him!" a rough voice shouted. Leo scrambled backward, panic surging through his chest. He turned and ran, navigating the treacherous walkway, but the men were fast. As he reached the bottom of a metal staircase, a heavy hand grabbed the back of his hoodie, jerking him backward off his feet. Leo hit the ground hard. His camera flew from his grip. It struck the concrete with a sickening crunch of glass and plastic. The device shattered, but in the chaos, the small memory card ejected from the broken casing. Unnoticed by the men, the tiny square of plastic skittered across the pavement and slid into a narrow, deep crack in the concrete foundation. "You saw something you should not have," the man growled, hauling Leo up by his collar. He did not strike the boy, but his grip was like iron. They dragged Leo toward a rusted shipping container. He was shoved inside, stumbling into the oppressive darkness. The heavy metal doors slammed shut, followed by the grinding noise of a locking bar sliding into place. Total darkness swallowed him. Leo fumbled for his phone, his hands trembling uncontrollably. He had one bar of signal. He dialed the only number that mattered. Jake answered on the first ring. "Leo, where are you?" Leo forced himself to breathe. He wanted to scream, to cry, but his father's voice brought a sudden clarity. He remembered the lessons Jake had drilled into him. Panic kills. Observe. Report. "Dad," Leo whispered, his voice shaking but distinct. "I am at District 4. I messed up." "I am coming," Jake said, his tone shifting instantly from anger to ice-cold focus. "Stay on the line." "They have a boat," Leo continued, pressing the phone to his ear as he curled up in the corner. "A high-speed boat. And Dad, the smell. It is strong here." "Tell me," Jake commanded. "It smells sharp," Leo said, closing his eyes to focus on the sensory input. "Like fresh asphalt and jet fuel. It is overpowering." The line crackled, the signal fading as the container walls blocked the connection. "Hang on, Leo, I am coming." The call cut off. Leo stared at the dark screen, the silence of the container pressing in on him. He was alone, but he had left a trail. He just hoped it was enough for the two hunters coming for him. The tires of Jake's pickup truck crunched softly over the gravel as he brought the vehicle to a halt just outside the perimeter of District 4. He killed the engine, stepping out into a world consumed by silence and gray vapor. The fog here was thick, rolling off the river in heavy, suffocating waves. To an ordinary person, this weather was a hindrance, blinding and cold. To Jake, it was a blessing. The moisture in the air would trap scent particles, holding them close to the ground like a road map printed in invisible ink. Jake walked around to the passenger side and opened the door. Wolf leaped out, his paws landing silently on the damp earth. The Silver Sable German Shepherd did not bark or run. He stood still, his nose twitching as he sampled the complex bouquet of the shipyard, rust, decaying wood, and the salty tang of the river. Jake reached into the back seat and pulled out a red flannel shirt. It was Leo's spare jacket, one the boy had left in the truck days ago. He knelt beside Wolf, holding the fabric out. "Find him," Jake whispered, the command low and urgent. Wolf pressed his nose deep into the fabric, inhaling the specific biological signature of the boy he had helped raise. He pulled back, gave a sharp sneeze to clear his nasal passages, and then lowered his head. The hunt had begun. Wolf moved with a slow, deliberate pace. He was not relying on sight. He was reading the story written on the ground. His tail waved slightly, a subtle metronome indicating focus. Jake followed a few paces behind, trusting the animal implicitly. They moved past the looming skeletons of unfinished ships until Wolf stopped abruptly near a pile of scrap metal. He circled a specific spot on the concrete, his sniffing becoming rapid and audible. Jake shone his flashlight down. Scattered across the ground were the jagged remains of a camera lens and black plastic casing. It was Leo's camera, destroyed. A surge of fear tightened Jake's chest, but he pushed it down. Panic was useless. Wolf did not linger on the broken plastic. He moved a few feet away, toward a deep, narrow fissure in the cracked concrete foundation. He lay down immediately, his nose pointing directly into the crevice, his amber eyes locking onto Jake. This was the alert signal. Jake knelt and shined his light into the crack. There, wedged safely out of sight, was a small black square, the memory card. With steady hands, Jake extracted the card. He pulled a rugged card reader from his tactical vest and connected it to his phone. The screen illuminated the fog as he accessed the last file. The video played. It was shaky at first, then stabilized. Jake watched, expecting only evidence of a crime, but he saw something else. The framing of the shipyard was artistic, capturing the haunting beauty of the decay. It was not just a reckless kid running around. It was a talented young man documenting the world. A pang of deep regret struck Jake. He had been so busy protecting Leo from the world that he had failed to see how his son viewed it. Then the camera zoomed in. The image on the small screen showed the black crates clearly. Smuggling, high-tech contraband. The lens panned up, capturing the face of a man barking orders. He was sharp-featured and cold. Jake memorized the face instantly. He now knew who they were fighting, and he knew his son was smart enough to leave him the key. The trail led them away from the open shipyard and toward a secluded cluster of corrugated metal warehouses perched precariously on the riverbank. The air here was heavy, saturated with a chemical pungency that burned the back of the throat. It was the distinct, acrid blend of creosote oil used to treat rotting pilings and the sharp, volatile scent of high-octane marine fuel. It was exactly the smell Leo had described over the phone. Jake signaled for a stop. He crouched beside Wolf, his hand resting gently on the thick ruff of fur around the dog's neck. He looked into the animal's amber eyes and made a subtle, flat hand motion near his waist. "Silent watch," Jake whispered, the command barely audible above the lapping water. Wolf understood instantly. The large Silver Sable Shepherd shifted his posture. His ears pinned back slightly, and he lowered his body profile, moving not with the bounce of a pet, but with the stalking fluidity of a predator. He became a ghost in the fog, his paws making no sound on the damp concrete. They moved as a synchronized unit into the maze of stacked shipping crates. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the occasional sweep of a distant searchlight. Wolf took the lead, stopping at every corner to sample the air, his tail held low and still. Ahead, the glow of a cigarette tip pierced the gloom. A guard stood near a side entrance, bored and distracted, scrolling through a phone with one hand, while a radio hung loosely from his belt. Jake pressed his back against a cold metal container. He took a slow, steadying breath. In his past life, threats were neutralized permanently. But tonight, he was not a soldier. He was a father, and he had promised himself he would leave the war behind. He needed to be efficient, not lethal. He waited for the guard to turn his back to flick ash into the wind. Wolf sensed the moment of action. The dog stiffened, a low, vibrating rumble building in his chest, warning Jake that the path was clear, but time was short. Jake moved. He closed the distance in 3 rapid, silent strides. Before the guard could cry out, Jake's arm wrapped around the man's neck in a precise rear naked choke. It was a classic judoka technique, applied with controlled pressure to the carotid arteries. The guard's hands flailed uselessly for a second, dropping the phone and the cigarette. Then his body went limp as consciousness slipped away. Jake lowered the unconscious man gently to the ground to avoid a thud. He checked the man's pulse to ensure he was stable, then zip-tied his hands and feet with practiced speed. Wolf emerged from the shadows, standing over the fallen man. He did not bite or attack. He simply watched, his head swiveling toward the warehouse door, his ears pricked forward. He let out a soft exhale through his nose, signaling to Jake that the immediate threat was contained, but the real danger lay just beyond the steel doors. The roar of the speedboat engine tore through the silence of the harbor, drowning out the gentle lapping of the waves against the pilings. The ringleader, a man with a face as sharp and cold as the steel surrounding them, gripped the back of Leo's hoodie. He shoved the teenager roughly toward the gangplank, desperate to cast off before the authorities arrived. "Let me go," Leo shouted, his voice cracking with exertion. He did not go quietly. Remembering the courage he had seen in his father, Leo twisted his body violently. He lashed out with his foot, driving his heel into a precariously stacked tower of plastic crates. The structure collapsed with a deafening clatter, spilling contraband across the deck and forcing the ringleader to stumble. That split second of chaos was all Jake needed. He burst from the shadows of the warehouse, sprinting across the wet concrete. "Get to the boat!" the ringleader screamed to his men as he regained his balance. 3 hired thugs intercepted Jake before he could reach the ramp. Jake moved with the economy of a veteran, parrying a wild punch and using the attacker's momentum to send him crashing into a metal pylon. But he was outnumbered. A heavy blow to his ribs sent him stumbling back, gasping for air. He was 45, not 25, and the years were heavy on his shoulders. One of the remaining henchmen, a burly man with a shaved head, circled behind Jake. He reached into his belt and withdrew a telescoping stun baton. The weapon extended with a sharp metallic hiss, and the tip sparked with blue arcs of electricity, emitting a menacing insect-like buzz. He raised the weapon, aiming for the base of Jake's neck. Jake was occupied with 2 other attackers and did not see the threat from behind. But Wolf did. From the top of a shipping container, a silver-gray blur launched into the air. Wolf did not bark. He acted. He cleared the gap between the crate and the dock in a single, magnificent leap. As the henchman swung the electric baton, Wolf's jaws clamped firmly onto the man's wrist. It was a precise, calculated disarm technique. Wolf applied crushing pressure, forcing the man to drop the weapon. The momentum of the 80-pound dog carried them both over the edge of the pier. A massive splash erupted as man and dog hit the dark, freezing water below. The sight of the silver beast taking down their comrade terrified the remaining smugglers. They hesitated, their eyes darting toward the black water where Wolf was paddling strongly back to the ladder, leaving the disarmed man treading water. Seizing the moment of hesitation, Jake refocused. He locked eyes with the ringleader. With a burst of adrenaline, Jake dropped low and executed a sweeping kick to the man's ankles. The ringleader's feet flew out from under him, and he hit the deck with a heavy thud, the breath driven from his lungs. Leo scrambled away from the fallen man, looking from his father to the water, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. The wail of sirens pierced the heavy morning mist, growing louder with every passing second. Flashing blue and red lights painted the gray industrial landscape in chaotic bursts of color as the river police boats roared into the harbor, their searchlights cutting through the gloom to pin the smugglers against the dock. Jake stepped back, his chest heaving as he watched the officers swarm the deck. The ringleader and his crew were handcuffed and led away, their heads hung low in defeat. Jake did not wait to give a statement. He had made the anonymous call hours ago, and he had no desire to be entangled in hours of paperwork. His priority was his pack. He knelt beside Wolf on the concrete pier. The Silver Sable Shepherd was soaked to the bone, his thick fur matted with river water and grime. Jake ran his hands over the dog's ribs and legs, checking for broken bones or deep lacerations. Wolf stood stoically, then nudged Jake's cheek with a cold, wet nose, and let out a soft, contented huff. Aside from a few minor scrapes from the fall and the biting cold of the water, the dog was unharmed. "Good boy," Jake whispered, his voice thick with relief. "You did good." Leo stood a few feet away, shivering slightly, looking down at his muddy sneakers. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind only exhaustion and the heavy weight of guilt. He looked young and small against the backdrop of the massive cranes. Jake stood up and closed the distance between them. He pulled his son into a fierce embrace, holding him tight enough to bruise. He needed to ground himself in the physical reality that Leo was safe, that he was breathing. "I am so sorry, Dad," Leo mumbled into Jake's shoulder, his voice trembling. "I should have listened. I messed up bad." Jake pulled back, holding Leo at arm's length to look him in the eye. "You made a mistake, Leo. A dangerous one." Leo nodded, sniffing back tears, but then a faint, tentative spark of his earlier spirit returned. He looked up at his father. "Yeah, I know. But did you see that parkour move? When I kicked those crates over?" A slow, tired smile finally broke through Jake's stony expression. The lingering anger evaporated, replaced by a begrudging respect. "I saw it. It was not bad. Your form was a little sloppy, but it was effective." Leo let out a breathless, relieved laugh. "Here is the deal," Jake said, his tone serious but warm. "I cannot lock you in a tower. I cannot stop you from seeing the world. But from now on, if you go filming in places like this, Wolf goes with you. He is your bodyguard, non-negotiable." "Deal," Leo agreed instantly, looking at the dog with new admiration. An hour later, the chaos of the crime scene was behind them. The three of them sat side by side on the lowered tailgate of Jake's old pickup truck, parked on a ridge overlooking the water. The heavy fog was finally lifting, burning away under the strength of the rising sun. The sky turned a brilliant shade of orange and gold over the Portland harbor, promising a clear day. Wolf jumped up onto the tailgate beside them. Without warning, the large dog began to shake his body vigorously from nose to tail. A spray of cold river water flew everywhere, soaking Jake and Leo all over again. "Wolf!" Jake shouted, shielding his face with his arm, but he was laughing. Leo laughed too, leaning in to wrap an arm around the wet dog's neck. They sat there as the new day began, wet, tired, and bruised, but for the first time in years, they were truly a team. We often think protection means building walls, but Jake learned that true safety comes from trusting the pack that stands beside you. Wolf proved that in the face of danger, a loyal heart is the only weapon that truly matters. If this story resonated with you, please share your warmth by liking the video and subscribing to our channel. We would be honored to hear about your own faithful companions in the comments below. To keep the spirit of adventure alive, simply click the video appearing on your screen now and let us journey together into the next tale.